world is so beautiful. Is everybody ready? All right. On March 23rd, 1983, President Ronald Reagan made his famous Star Wars speech, announcing his plans to develop a missile defense system that would make nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. His vision of a shield that could protect us from nuclear missiles just as a roof protects a family from the rain was both seductive and audacious, like my speech. So, this quotation from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in April 2008 illustrates the advocate of the negative team in today's debate round. The beloved Ronald Reagan, that missile defense is for our national security, and the current missile defense will be protecting us with no detriment to relations or to Russia. And this is the stance of Ronald Reagan, who's dead, and the negative team in today's debate round. With that said, let's address the 1AC of the affirmative team. The first issue is that of the criterion, and I'd like to remind you that the criterion is the ultimate goal that both teams must strive to uphold in a speech and debate round. Whoever wins the criterion debate, therefore wins the goal, and therefore should win the round. I would like to propose the counter criterion, a counter goal, that of U.S. interests. And I have two reasons to prefer U.S. interests to their criterion of relations with a focus on national security. The first one is that of ultimate goal. If we look at what relations are used for, relations are only good for improving U.S. interests. So it's a means to an end, and it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal of relations is U.S. interests, so it overrides it as a goal. And my second response is purpose of government. In the United States Constitution, the purpose of the U.S. government is to provide for the interests of the American people and the U.S. government, not Russia, and if the relations do not fulfill the interests of the United States, then it's not fulfilling its purpose. For instance, we could give Russia $1 trillion, and that would be great for relations, but that would be horrible for U.S. interests, so it's not a valid criterion. With that said, and with the goal in mind that of U.S. interests, let us address the affirmative team's case. Their first background point was that of U.S. missile defense, and they talked about how there's a missile defense system being placed in Poland. I'm going to be responding to this under their impact, which was in background point 2. So they mentioned in background point 2 that it's in Poland, and their impact was that it threatens Russia. I have 5 responses to this assertion. The first one is that of defensive. Here's a quotation from Peter Brooks at the Journal of International Security Affairs in spring of 2008, quote, "It should be emphasized that missile defense is a defensive, not offensive weapon. This means that missile defense threatens no one. Missile defense only undermines the capability of one country to threaten or attack another with its ballistic missiles," end quote. So our missile defense only supports U.S. interests without any detriment to any other country, but only a positive impact on U.S. security. This leads me to my second response, that of no threat to Russia. No threat to Russia. Here's a quotation from Voice of America in news in July of 2010. Quote, "The United States and Poland Saturday signed an amendment agreement under which U.S. missile interceptors aimed against a developing Iranian threat will be based on Polish soil. Secretary of State Clinton said the revised program will make a system operational sooner than one promoted by the Bush administration and will pose no threat to Russia. This is extremely important because from the experts on the United States side of things, it's not going to be posing any threat to Russia. Now, my third response is that of Russia can inspect. Here's a quotation from the Atlantic Council in July of 2010. Quote, "We want the facility to be as transparent as possible. We would like the Russian Federation in particular to have confidence that the facility is built for the declared ends, and therefore on a reciprocal basis, we would be happy for it to be inspected," end quote. So this by the way, was quoting Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, and he says he puts it very well, that it's not going to pose any threat to Russia. The stated goal is to combat Iran's threat, and therefore, and they're also inviting Russia to even inspect these facilities. My fourth response is that of not aimed. The point is that these are not aimed at Russia, but Iran. Here's a quote from Adelaide Now in 2010. Quote, "The emerging missile defense architecture in Europe is not aimed at Russia, but rather the emerging threat from Iran," said State Department spokesman Philip Cowley. This is the stance of the negative team. This is the fact. It upholds U.S. interests because it blocks the threat threat from Iran. My fourth response is bark no bite. Bark no bite. Now their quotation was about Medvedev making very vague assertions about how they might do something, but there was no evidence that Russia would indeed retaliate if we posted our missile defense. And my fifth response is that of sources. Their sources are from Medvedev and the Voice of Russia saying that it would be dangerous to Russia. This is not from experts. This is simply not true. Just because Russia says it might be dangerous to them doesn't mean that the impact is true, that it will threaten Russia. So clearly it's unfounded, and it's only for U.S. security and U.S. interests. Let's move down to the background point 3, that of Russia's retaliation. Their first impact was that they're going to pull out of the START treaty. My first response to this is no impact, no impact. Even if they pull out of the START treaty, so what? That's not such a bad thing. And here's a quotation, right here. Here's a quotation from the Foreign Policy in 2010. Quote, it's a U.S. Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. It says, quote, "The reality is that with or without the treaty, Russia's nuclear arsenal is in serious decline, with the life of many warheads expiring. Russia's warhead and delivery vehicle numbers are already largely within the limits of the new treaty, whereas it is the U.S. who would have to reduce significantly its nuclear weapons and delivery vehicles. Thus, Russia needs this treaty more than does the United States in order to lock in parity between the two sides." End quote. So even if this impact comes true, that is upholding U.S. interests because we maintain our nuclear superiority over Russia. This is an advantage of the current system. Impact 2 was that they're going to increase their weapons. My response is no link. There was no link in the evidence that if we follow through with our Polish missile defense plans, they'll increase their weapons. It just said, oh, they're going to increase their weapons to 80,000. It was completely unconnected with missile defense. This is not a real impact of their said background point, that of Russian retaliations. Let's move down to the advantages. The first advantage was that of relations. I have three responses. The first one is that of real-world impact. They have not, I challenge the affirmative team to read us a quotation from an expert saying that if we put these weapons on the these missile defense systems on the Polish border, it would have such an effect on Russian relations that our national security interests, like in Afghanistan, or our cooperation efforts with Russia, would indeed be affected in the real world. And this leads me to my second point, that of relations not an end. Relations are not an end in and of themselves. Okay, relations are harm, big deal. If they can't prove that those harm in relations have an impact on U.S. security, then there is no reason to vote on this point. And keep in mind the criterion, that of U.S. interest. The second advantage was that of $85 billion. Two responses. First of all, money never spent. This money will never be spent, and therefore you can't gain it. Because their argument was that, oh, then we are not going to spend the money in the START treaty. But the point is, we aren't going to spend the money in the START treaty, so it won't be wasted. It'll go right back to the general budget. That's how the government works. The second point is treaty done. So the START treaty, if truly it is blocked by the current system, then we will never spend that $85 billion, and the current system will actually save it and not lose it. Now, the third advantage I'd like to turn it is that of security. Now, my first point across from this is wrong mindset. Their point is that we cannot increase because other people will. Well, I want to refer you back to the arms race. Every time we increased, Russia increased. That doesn't mean we decrease because Russia increased, because it's all for our national security. We cannot decrease missile defense because we bow to foreign governments. Thank you. Doing great, thank you.
Great. Okay, so my first question is actually talking about your response to background point number 2.
Yes, ma'am.
You stated that there was no threat because the missile defense is aimed at Iran.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, how far does the SM-3 missile defense interceptor actually go?
How far does it go? I believe it's intercontinental. It can go over Russia and, yes, respond to the Armenian threat.
Do you have a mileage base?
A mileage base? I'm not.
How many miles?
I don't count. I only count car miles. I don't count the miles that a nuclear missile can accept in others. Sorry.
Okay. Now, geographically. Thank you. That was really messed up. Geographically, where is Poland in comparison to Iran?
Geographically, it is across a continent, but all of our experts know that if we put them in Poland, it will be able to respond to the Iranian threat. And if you can bring up evidence that it won't be able to reach Iran, which is against everything that our country has been doing in the past couple of years, you're welcome to, but that's simply not the case.
Definitely. Now, you stated that does Iran right now have a nuclear missile?
Do they have a nuclear missile?
Yes.
No, but it's a well-known fact that it's one of the gravest nuclear threats in the status quo, Iran.
Now, regardless of if it's a threat or not to Russia.
Actually, they probably do have nuclear missiles right now. I just remembered. Yes, they do have nuclear.
Now, as of right now, did you disagree with the fact that President Medvedev is against the nuclear defense?
I didn't. He's all bark, no bite. There's no evidence that he's going to bite because, well, he wouldn't actually bite us, but there's no evidence that he's going to take action against U.S. interests if we do this.
Now, is there a clause within the new start treaty saying that they're actually allowed to withdraw if their missile defense is needed?
I would be totally fine with Russia withdrawing because then we don't have to scale down our missiles when they don't have to do anything. That'd be excellent for U.S. interests.
So, do you believe in non-proliferation, or do you believe that we should
I believe in non-proliferation, but I believe that if anybody has the nukes, it should be us.
Successfully, we're actually contending to the fact that we actually can increase the amount of nuclear weapons as well. Russia can increase the amount of nuclear weapons.
But as my evidence said, the Russian arsenal is in decline. It's falling apart. They aren't going to increase their nuclear weapons. Your evidence only said their general missiles, but that has nothing to do with nuclear proliferation.
Okay. Now, as of right now, in the Russian economy or in the Russian government,
Yes,
do they have a rearmament program?
Do they have a rearmament? But it's not nuclear rearmament. They do have rearmament, but the evidence in this debate round says that they're in decline, so we can assume that they are indeed in decline with their nuclear efforts.
Now, are you aware of the amount of money that the Russian government is going to be spending on rearmament?
I'm not aware, but unless you can prove that it's nuclear rearmament and that it'll therefore go over the United States, then there's no reason that that has any impact on U.S. interests, or that Russia will attack us. That also has to be proven, so it's a very complex thing.
Okay.
Thank you very much.